Welcome to 50/50 Books, the book review podcast where the books are split in two, and figuring out just what is going on is always a toss-up. I'm Taylor.
And I'm Jonathan.
This month, we're reading The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. We read up to, but not including, the chapter titled, If Something is Happening to Me, I Want to Be There.
Do we want to start with some structure talk, how the book is presented to us?
The usual start. I was surprised by how short the chapters were, which I can get behind because it just makes the reading so much easier because you're like blasting through it and you think you're accomplishing a lot. So I'm not upset by it. Sometimes I thought it was too short though, like too simple. Like I feel like there's not a lot of internal monologue happening here. It's really like, this is the action that's happening, this is the dialogue that's happening, and then we're gonna move on. Like, I feel like there's some snippets where we get Nora's internal monologue, Nora being, main character, but maybe I'm just wanting a little bit more internal monologue, especially for a book about what this is about.
I think it does kind of, Taylor, you put a note about this of it reading like a screenplay. Like, it does feel like a movie with all the dialogue and action-based things. There are moments, especially when she goes into a new life, where she's like thinking and observing, and those parts are the only parts that aren't like that, really.
Yeah, because there's like a conversation between her and Hugo later, and somebody says something, and then the next line is awkward pause, and then somebody else says something, and I'm like, this is
the stage direction.
I'm like, this is not enough. Like, I kind of want more. Like, I want more of. It's like okay to take in the environment and what's going on, but it really is just personal preference. I kind of just want Nora's thoughts about things as they're happening. Like, what is she thinking about Hugo while he's saying these things? Like, why is it an awkward pause? Like, I need more information. Like, I don't need it to be like bogged down with so much internal monologue that it just becomes like internal monologue. But
I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting that she doesn't do that, she's not monologuing a lot, but then we get cool scenes, like when she's in her Olympic athlete life and she's basically reflecting on everything she's experienced in front of a large audience. Because I think like that was the way of getting the monologue out there, right? It's saying I can manage to write this book without doing any internal monologue because I can make it an action. I can make it a like the whole experience she's having is kind of internal anyway. Like she's the only one. Well, she's not the only one experiencing it, I guess we find out, but she's the only one experiencing her experience, and the only person she can talk to about it is probably not real, meaning Mrs. Elm. So I think it is kind of a way of internal monologue, just putting it in an active setting.
I think, okay, now that you say that, actually, like, it's actually, I think, a good idea. I will preface this by saying, I'm not, like, torn up about the lack of internal monologue. It's fine. But I think it does actually suit this book very well because one of the things going on with her seems to be like a lack of genuine connection. Like she doesn't like people relying on her, but she also needs people, but also she doesn't really have anybody. And then relationships kind of fall away or they kind of get toxic. And the idea that she's saying all of these things, like actually saying them to people and kind of reaching out in that way with her thoughts, which might be like the first time she's really ever done that, I think is fitting for a book like this. It just makes everything seem, especially when there is dialogue, everything seems so quick. But I think for getting through the lives that the book probably wants to get through, you kind of have to be quick.
Right, yeah. I actually wanted to ask because I'm reading the large print version of this. Like most of my chapters are 2 or 3 pages for the first, 3/4 of the parts that we've read so far. Do most of the chapters fit on a single page in your copies?
Yeah, the very beginning kind of chapters, especially her first time in the library, it's like 2 or 3 pages maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, or I have some that are just like 1, maybe a little bit longer than 1.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering, I wonder how much white space there is in this book. Mine certainly has plenty,
There's a lot. I mean, I appreciate it though.
Yeah, me too. And it's funny because it's not a very long book to begin with, to think of that.
Right.
But anyway, I like it. I almost like the simple presentation. I think it's interesting when we have something like complicated and, well thought out. Like I like a fun structure, but there's a lot of value in the simplicity that we have with this one. It makes the story more engaging.
Yeah, I guess I just expected as I always do, I expected something that wasn't given. Like, I didn't know much going into this book. I kind of knew about the like mental health stuff, but I guess because it's so philosophical, but it's like it's like philosophy light. Like, you could really get into it in this book, I think, which is maybe what I'm expecting, but you don't. And I think that makes it palatable for people who don't read philosophy.
100%. Yeah, I think it would put people off.
Right.
Yeah, you don't need to like know any Thoreau in order for you to understand what her relationship with Thoreau is and why he matters in the book, right? Like everything's laid out for you. So I think it's the perfect way to handle it.
But it is interesting that Thoreau is Nora's favorite because he like fucked off and lived in the woods and
Right.
wanted to be on his own, even though people would bother him like all the time. Interesting for Nora because I think that's what she thinks she wants, but not really what she wants.
Yeah. Well, she's kind of getting it, right? Like she is kind of alone despite like sharing these alternate lives with other people. So, I don't know. I think she's getting that. She's probably getting lonely, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right. Like, I think it's important for her to realize that she doesn't need to connect her dreams to other people, which is kind of how she's been living this whole time.
That's true.
Like, the whole thing of you need to love yourself before you love other people,
Right,
which,
right.
I mean, isn't like an absolute rule. We're not going to get into the whole bit with that, though. But I think she needs to put herself first and, like, love herself before she... Like, I think that's what freaks her out so much about people relying on her, is because she feels like she can't exist as a human in the correct way type of situation. And, you know, we kind of moved from structure into Nora.
I know. I was
so
just
let's
gonna
just
say,
keep
should we
going
just
with
start
it.
talking about Nora? Because I have thoughts. Yeah, yeah. She definitely has things she wants and like wanted to do that she's put aside.
Right.
Like she does talk a lot in the things happened to me and like I ended up here. But I think it is interesting that the book explores choice and like breakpoints that could have caused different outcomes, because she does not she's not like depressed in the sense that she's like, I want nothing and like there's really no purpose. It's like she's more like, I've let things go that would have provided those things and I had those things, right? So and I think particularly with the whole like singing in the labyrinths is like the biggest one that sticks out to me. She seems to still talk about that fondly and wish she had done that. And while there's negative parts of it, right, like her brother putting a lot of weight into it and just like certain pressures, with stage presence, she seemed to really like it a lot and wish that she had done that even with all of those things. So it's like, I think she has desires that are her own and kind of lets the external pressures affect those things, which when I say that, I don't mean to say that like, oh, she's like a bad person for it, because I think that's super duper normal. Like I think a lot of people experience that and are affected in their desires based on the way that the world reacts to them. But it feels like she's given like what she needs to realize, I guess, in this, or what she's going to realize in this, is that she has those things. It's a matter of how she makes them work for herself despite the hard parts of them. Right.
And I also think it's about the grandiose nature of the goal. Like, she is kind of, I put in our notes, the millennial poster child.
Yeah.
Because she's like academic, sporty, like high achiever. Like, she has all these possibilities. And she gets fired because she's like basically overqualified and she should actually do something with her life. And like all of her choices could have been something, I guess, except Dan's thing. But that was like a lack of her own abilities. That was just going along with him, which was probably easy at the time. But the band was like getting a record deal and it was like gonna blow up apparently.
Yeah,
and then she
legit.
could have went to the Olympics and like she could have done all of these very grand things. And I think there's something to be said for the life she had at String Theory, which was the music store, which also a very funny name for the store considering this book.
Yeah.
Which we're not gonna talk about String Theory here. Go
that
Google
was good
it.
though. That was really funny. I like that was a good foreshadowing.
Yeah, I mean the Labyrinth was a pretty good
Yeah.
note too. But like she could do all these grand things, but I think there's something to be said for just, and I've said this my entire life, for just being content. Like you don't have to do a lot. I think she liked writing for the Labyrinths more than she liked performing for them.
Right.
And maybe she couldn't have done this at the time because of the time period of when that band was a thing. But to just write for a band and maybe perform and like put out online so possible now. Like, you don't have to perform. And I think maybe if she could have just written for it and not had to have performed, that would have been a step down from how grand that band could have been, maybe. But I think she could have been content with that, which I think is a big thing.
It was attainable, right? Like, it's like,
right.
This is not a goal that feels like it's not authentic to me and like out of my range. So
right. And
yeah,
same with
that.
like the Olympic swimming. Like, you don't have to go to the Olympics.
Right.
Well, I guess you do if you're like want to be big in sports. But she was like in Australia, in her Australian life, she was swimming every morning, and like there could just be something good about doing that, even if it's just for yourself. Like, I think those are the things she needs to grab onto. Like, she doesn't need to choose one thing forever and make it super big and become super big with it. She can just have the things that she enjoys, and they can be small.
Yeah, a lot of that seems to come from the parents too, right? Like,
oh, absolutely.
I think it's so hard when you just don't get closure on so many hard things happening to you. Like, especially when we see her last day before she decides to die, it's like so many things, so many, cans of worms were open that did not seem like they were closing anytime soon. She already had these issues with the brother, with her, career aspirations, with, her dad passing away, like so many things that she didn't get closure on and might never get closure on. So having so many things open and never closed, you don't really get the chance to like get something positive out of them. I think a lot of us go through things that are tough, and after we've had time to reflect or feel closure on them, we get something out of them, we can grow from them. But if you're not given the opportunity to get any of that, you get stuck, And
I mean, yeah, the thing with closure, everything keeps getting brought up. Like, Dan still texts her and is like, oh man, I miss you. And it's like, block his number.
Right.
Like, stop talking to him. He's not good for you. And like wanting to have that connection to her family, like with her brother, because he's still around, and the absolute inability to talk to him. Like, he came to town and did not see her.
Right.
All because she ruined his music career. And it's like, she was having panic attacks. Like, that's not good. It's just like, it's so awful that the one person that seemed to really be there for her, Izzy, was dead.
Yeah.
In the life that they could have had together in Australia.
Truly.
It's just like, because Izzy was like, oh, you're leaving 2 days before your wedding, let's run away together. And could that have connotations? Maybe.
I was thinking about that too.
But that's just my little brain working.
It is kind of a shame that every life that she lives, like her cat's dead in all of them, and then like her best friend is dead in the other one, and like the only people who seem to remain alive are the ones who give her all this external pressure.
Right.
And even one person was like undeaded, so that way he could also apply external pressure to her. I think the one more thing I want to add to the career thing, like her being pushed by all of these people, is like even her, I forget her boss's name at the music store, but
Neil or something.
Neil firing her basically, right, because she's overqualified and should have aspirations. I just get so frustrated with some people's inclination to tell people what they should be doing with their lives. I know. It was so frustrating to read that. Like, if in the hype, obviously he knows Nora more than us the readers do, so he maybe felt more comfortable saying, I know you don't want this, and she does say, he's right, I don't want this, but making the decision for her, forcing her into a situation where she has to do something or she won't be able to pay rent for it, is maybe not the way to do it. And I hate when people like take the power that they have to try to control someone else's life path. People do it too much. It's just have a conversation. Don't like decide something for someone else. It was just so frustrating to read.
Yeah, I think he mentioned that she like brings the mood down in the store.
Yeah, there was definitely some of Neil's own insecurities coming out there.
Yeah, but it's also like, you need a job to live, and the idea that you need to like be your work and you cannot have hobbies and you should be putting in extra hours and like all of this crazy like batshit insane stuff, and it's like, it's nothing. Neil could have been like, you used to write music and like you were great at it, because she obviously like still kind of plays piano, or at least she knows enough to tutor somebody, so it's like, why don't you give that a shot again? So she could like try to do the music thing again, because it seems like she was supporting the labyrinths basically on her own anyway. So she could like take on hobbies again and like try to do this stuff. She could get a therapist because she obviously needs one, and she could still have a job while she's doing all of that stuff.
Yeah, you still need the job to be a jumping off point. Like if you send someone, right? It's like Maslow's basically. If you send someone down into like poverty, like they're not gonna have time, energy, or money to do the things that you want them to do. Like they can't reach aspiration from there, you know?
Right, because what other job is she getting with a philosophy degree?
Exactly. I think you're totally right. Like Neo would probably had actually a lot of power to help her too, like not just like send her off, right? He owns a music store. She is a musician. Like do some basic math here, and
Right.
You might find out that it would be a good environment for her to be able to like grow in those things. And if she doesn't want to, fine, but like offer those things since you have the resources around you.
Yeah, and we could get into the whole like mental health impacting creative endeavors and all of that stuff. Been there. But I mean, in an ideal world, that's what would have happened. You know? Instead of him just firing her. Because the idea that she's overqualified and she should go make something of her life is bullshit. He just wanted to fire her. I'm like so convinced.
I know, it kind of makes you think with the speech that she gives as the athlete where she's like, success is bollocks. I'm like, yeah, honestly.
Yeah.
I hear you.
So we've mentioned her life falling apart, which leads into really what kicks off this book in that she unalives herself.
She attempts suicide. Yeah.
Who knows if she succeeds? We don't know how this book ends. But she kind of goes to this in-between space, which is the Midnight Library, as we're told. And the librarian overseeing it is Mrs. Elm, who was an old librarian she knew. Not the real Mrs. Elm, but some creature masquerading as Mrs. Elm. I think for benevolent reasons. I mean, how else would you describe it? A spirit, a shapeshifter.
Emergence. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about a creature, though.
Some guardian presence who's there to guide her is taking on the form of Mrs. Elm, because really the only person Nora had was that librarian, which speaks a lot to her life, that it was this one librarian. That's a little sad. But I mean, we've all been there. We've had like teachers that we've really connected with and like vibed with, you know?
It's good that she had a mentor figure, you know?
Yeah. So yeah, that's when we're introduced to what this book is kind of about, which is the different lives that she can, I guess, play around with. And the point is to try and find one that she can settle into, or she dies, or she goes back, or like, you know, something happens. Some choice needs to be made, I guess. Or she'll just die, because you don't choose death. Death comes for you, I think is what Mrs. Elm says. But yeah, so we have 3 lives she tries in what we, like, where we stopped. That's what we got to. So the first one was with Dan, which was the most like 1950s life she could have attempted.
I don't know. It's funny you say that, because I kind of envisioned that. Like I was like thinking like, oh, she's like this is like 200 years in the past. She's just like the classic doing what her husband asks her to, not living her own life, like probably wearing 10 layers of clothing. Like
I mean, I think it's fine that she tried like love first.
Mm-hmm.
It does speak to the idea of contentness that I've mentioned before. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with getting married and having a very simple, happy life together. But we kind of had some hints of red flags, I think, beforehand. And then we got to the life, and there was nothing but red flags. So, the fact that she left the wedding so soon made me nervous about Dan. I will say that.
Right.
And she wanted to move the wedding, but Dan was like, or I guess it wasn't technically Dan. It probably was Dan. But basically, it was like, we can't move the wedding. And it's like,
seemed to happen passively more than anything, but yeah.
Yeah, I think because they had like things booked and stuff like that, which makes sense. But also, her mom died.
Yeah.
And sure, her relationship with her mom was, you know, what it was. But she like took care of her mom and was there for her, and that still impacts you, you know? The idea that she was supposed to just move on or like act like she had moved on and get married to somebody. And then obviously we learn later that it was to somebody who wasn't really great for her. It's just like an issue, I think.
I get the sense that even if the wedding was like 8 months after her mom died, she would have done the same thing.
Oh, absolutely.
It is interesting that she gets to explore it because she seems to have nostalgia for it. And she says in one of the earlier scenes, you know, she's ignoring these texts from Dan, but she does it because she does love him, you know, and she doesn't want to hurt him further. So it's kind of nice that she gets this opportunity to say, okay, even if I did love him and even if I thought even if I thought we should have gotten married, like, it's good to know that this is what it would have ended up like, you know?
Right.
Yeah. I guess I don't know. We haven't talked about all the details of the Midnight Library yet. I think it's making me think about the Book of Regrets, though.
Oh, we forgot a life if we're bringing up the Book of Regrets.
Oh, did we?
Yeah, the one where she didn't let Voltaire go outside.
That's a good
point. That
point.
was the first one.
Because it was so brief.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, Voltaire's dead. I guess I'm disappointed again. Yeah. I think the Book of Regrets is kind of an interesting way to approach it because that's how she even ends up in this Dan's situation, right? In this Dan life, is to say, I regret not marrying him. And it kind of just proves her wrong. I think the emphasis on you can control your decisions, but not the outcomes is what's like really interesting here. And that she was like, I can choose to go ahead and marry Dan anyway, but I can't choose to make it good. I can't choose to control Dan's behavior. Like it is just going to be what it's going to be.
I have two thoughts about that life happening. One is I like what Mrs. Elm says in that this cat was happy. Like it had a good life no matter the time frame. Like it was a good life that it had with you, Nora. And I think Nora needed to hear that. My only issue with that was then the regret like disappeared from the book. And I get in that moment she probably had the regret dissolve. But if it's about what Nora is thinking in her head and what she regrets personally, not like a fact of life, but just like a very personal regret and experience, will that regret come back? Because even though she was told Voltaire had a great life, it was very, very happy with you, that cat. And she might believe it then, but the issue with mental health is Mrs. Elm could say that 50 million times to me, but if I'm having a moment, I'm not going to believe it myself, you know?
Mm.
So I'm wondering if any regrets are going to come back.
I think for me, it makes sense that the regrets would go away, and at the least, she might still have other regrets show up, or other regrets that were already there that were like, I wish I took Bolts to the vet one more time, or, you know, I wish I had bought her the fancier food. But are those regrets ones that matter so much anymore? You know, like, especially having heard that Volts was happy. But even without that, like, you know, even if she just found out that it was out of her control, like, she might still have regrets about the way she took care of him, but just not feel so deeply responsible for it.
That's a good point. Like, Nora's, one of her issues is control. So the fact that she couldn't have done anything might have been relieving to know. Because she feels like everything is her fault.
Right, like, it doesn't mean bad things don't happen, but she can at least, the responsibility can be lifted from her, at least in part, if not the whole thing, and at least the heaviest parts can be lifted.
Right, and it's similar to what happened in the Dan life, which she feels like she ruined Dan's life by leaving him at the altar, basically. But even when she stayed, his life was kind of falling apart. Like, the pub wasn't doing great, and they were obviously in an unhappy marriage. But that's, like, none of that is on her. So, and then the athletic Olympian life, her speech at the end about having, like, rotten roots is, I think, something she needs to deal with. And I think she's slowly dealing with it because she thinks she's the problem. But, I mean, sometimes the universe just does its thing, you know?
Yeah, I do wonder if, like, if everything will be absolved, you know, if, like,
right,
you know, maybe there's some ways in which it would be good for her to reflect on things that might still be her fault, you know, like things where it's like, I didn't let myself do that, you know, I didn't let myself be myself, those sorts of things. I think those are the sorts of regrets that she should still be allowed to have.
Yeah, because you want to balance that line of not everything is your fault, but also sometimes you have to do the thing. Like, it's scary, but sometimes you have to do it. And the fact that you didn't, it's like the different kind of regrets, right? The regrets of the things you did, and then the regrets of your life of what you didn't try to do.
Mhm.
And I think taking the blame a little bit for the things that you didn't try is okay. I think Nora is just working in absolutes right now, which is never a thing.
Right.
Like, the Book of Regrets is a gray book, I think, for a reason, in that
Mm.
nothing is black and white.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, especially with the fading in and out. Nothing stays solid.
Yeah. I'm a bit of a genius.
Oh, wow. Do you have like an English degree or something?
Oh my god. The other thing with the lives is she gets to try them on, but as soon as she's like overcome with disappointment, then she goes back to the library. And the whole thing is, if she never feels that disappointment, she kind of just settles into the life. And also, when she's in the life, she doesn't remember anything but her root life, so she's kind of just thrown into a role she doesn't have the script for, which I thought was an issue, because I feel like you're not really experiencing that life if you don't have the memories of that life.
Yeah.
And also, when you settle into that life, do you then get the memories? Because I think Mrs. Elm says, when you settle into a life, eventually the Midnight Library will become like a dream. And so I'm wondering, will Nora lose the memories of her root life if she settles into another life? And I'm going to say right now, this book is philosophy light, but I could go on for ages. The idea of memory and personhood, I think, is very important in this book. I don't think we've delved into it a lot, like, actually in the book, but if Nora settles into a life, and that means she forgets her old life, or she takes on the memories of this new life, she'll no longer be herself, and so she'll still die. Like, the Nora of the root life will still die in some capacity. So I'm not really sure what's being accomplished by the Midnight Library, if that's how it works. Like, I still don't know how the memories really work in terms of settling, so I can't make that claim for sure. And also the idea of disappointment sending you out of that life. Like, if you forget where you came from, are you more susceptible to being disappointed in that life because you don't, like, the grass is greener on the other side, right? Like, if you don't remember that your root life was shit, then will you become disappointed in the life you're currently in because you don't remember that there were other lives that were worse? I guess, like, there's just not enough clarity in what's going on. Because I also feel like a lack of disappointment is also impossible. I guess the fact that it has to be overwhelming makes it a little easier, but to live an entire life and then not be disappointed by what's going on just does not seem possible. And also, Nora brings up how life seems like darkness with like bits of good, and it's like you kind of need both good and bad, which is why I have an issue with Hugo, because he's kind of vibing and like going to we should explain who Hugo is. Hugo is somebody she meets in her glaciologist life, and he notices her and the fact that she has her library because he has his video store, which is his version of the library. So they kind of, are talking about it. And he describes himself as a slider, which is just somebody who goes to the different lives and doesn't really intend to settle, I guess, is the plan. Because why would you settle when you could basically experience the entire world because anything is possible type of situation? But my issue with that is, okay, so you have settling, which is to live without feeling disappointment. And then you have sliders who are living bits in these other worlds to experience them, but they're not settling. So they're just getting, like, the highs, basically.
Right. It's like candy.
And it's like, neither of those are possible. Because to not experience disappointment is, again, with the black and white thing. Like, you can't just have the good moments. You also need the bad moments. So I don't think Hugo is technically living either, which was my issue with him, like, praising the slider lifestyle. It's like you're not making connections that can last anywhere. especially if memory becomes an issue with settling into a life. Like, even if you maybe made friends in this past life, but they settled somewhere, now they don't remember you, or they don't remember their library. So it's like, I think Hugo I just think Hugo's wrong. I don't think you can live as a slider because you're not actually living. You're just kind of existing and trying to do all the great things, and at that point you might as well just be dead.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I would say, I would maybe not go as far as to say that he's not living, because yeah, what is the difference if you're just gonna die in the end anyway, or if this is effectively the same as death? So like, to me, it's like, what's it matter? And what's it matter meaning like, sure, why not do it, I guess, you know? It's interesting. I think it's like two sides of the nothing matters argument, right? Like, I think Nora is very much the nothing matters, so why do anything? And Hugo's nothing matters, so you should do everything.
Right. Very, like, you can see nihilism as the worst thing you've ever heard in your life because nothing means anything, or so freeing that, you know, you live life to the fullest.
I do think there's like a little section here where she calls him like annoying and attractive, but then like arrogant. Like, and I'm like, yeah, like I feel like this is the right combination of things. It's like there's something charming about him, but like he is kind of like grating to hear talk about it in this way. It like feels, if something feels wrong about it, and maybe that's because we just came out of these first number of chapters with Nora's perspective, that it just feels like the wrong way to do it. But maybe we should read more before we trash him too much, because I think there is something positive about the way he's handling it.
Right.
One detail maybe I'm not so sure about is whether or not, like, if you're eventually going to forget your midnight library, there's probably a certain point where disappointment doesn't call you back to it anymore, because you don't even remember that it exists. That's my theory. It's possible it could still bring you back, and then you'll like be like, oh wait, I do remember this. But I would think that at a certain point, when you're considered by the whatever being library thing that to be settled in a new life, like that's that you're probably not ever going back.
I just feel like Mrs. Elm said, like, you settle there until you die. So I feel like it's always possible to come back.
I'm confused about that, because there's a lot of talk of the watch, and like it's not moving basically, right? Like it's midnight and it stays midnight when she's in the library. So I was like, are the other universes paused? Like when she goes to live the life, does the other universe that, or like does her root universe continue when she like dies or whatever in that universe? You know, like I'm confused about whether or not that actually matters. And this is something I want to talk about with the system error too. Like whether or not the amount of time it would take her to die matters. Like if hypothetically it should just all be paused.
Right. I think we're thinking of time too linear. Like, I think she's experiencing things, and so as we think of time, it would be moving in the Midnight Library, but it's also outside of time if we think of it as like a dimensional space, which is why it's not moving. And so everything else would also be not moving because she's disconnected from time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like, I don't know.
I mean, Mrs. Elm explains that the lives aren't necessarily running parallel. They're also kind of moving perpendicular.
Oh,
so I think we need to just abandon the idea that all of these lives are moving at the same rate.
Mm-hmm. Perpendicular does make sense, right? Because then it's like it's moving forward, but the time is staying the same somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah, let's talk about the system error a bit more then while we're on it.
Okay. It happens after her Australian life.
Mm-hmm. Which is like she's just given that speech.
Oh, wait, it wasn't Australia. It was the Olympian life, right?
Yeah, the Olympian one.
Oh my god, we're a mess.
I can't, for some reason, like, I read the Australian life and then just imagined the Olympian one happening in Australia, so that's really throwing me off, because that's obviously not what happened. It was in London. So, yeah, so she, like, has just given the speech that she, like, winged in front of all those people, and is low-key falling apart. Like, she's saying it doesn't matter, like, there's no point, like, success is fake. So I think she's kind of reinvesting herself in like not living anymore. So when she comes back, the system error is happening because death is being welcomed. Like she's saying, all right, like I'm really feeling like, yes, strong in I'm making this decision again, basically. And so the system error is like, okay, like the Midnight Library is not working, and like death, come get me, come pick me up. But I think also maybe returning to the Midnight Library and being surrounded by like seeing Miss Elm and like being surrounded by all the possibilities again, she kind of grounds herself for a moment and is able to prevent that from happening, like unintentionally prevents that from happening. That's my thought.
I think the fact that Mrs. Elm was also confused by the system error is concerning. Because I think if it's something expected, like she's feeling a type of way, or something external is happening, such as death is meeting her, then I think that would be typical for this kind of place. Because they only have so many options. You pick a life, you stay alive in your root life, you die. Like, I think those are basically what you're living with here.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're a slider and you kind of, you vibe. But, so if death was coming for her in her root life, that would be a normal thing to happen for this situation.
That's a good point.
Oh, you mentioned, John, the idea of suicidal people like getting this chance and like this being a cure. That is an issue I have with this book in how it could possibly go, because you either have people who are suicidal, or you have people who like basically, I guess, died too soon or died with too many regrets unexpectedly. And it's like, I think this is something we always have to be cautious of. Are we glorifying or like romanticizing suicide in this?
Well, I think that's going to matter a lot with the way the book ends.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's like my only concern with reading it so far. But that's my concern with reading anything that ever has suicide in it.
Yeah, it's like, hard to talk about something dark. Like,
right.
I mean, period. But like to approach it in this way where it's like having a dynamic emotional range and like still being about suicide, right? Like, it's hard to deliver that message the same to everyone who reads it. So
right, because I think the message does have the potential to be a good one, in that, if you don't mind me moving to how we think this might end.
No, I think it's good timing. Yeah.
I brought up some possible scenarios, because she could either die, like flat out, whether she chooses it or not, it could still be an ending. I think if she chooses it, not great. Not a good look for this book. The other option is she chooses to take on another life, but then that's sending the message of sometimes you can't fix your life.
Right. It's still kind of a suicide choice if you're going with the, that's killing old Nora, right? Like,
right. Like, I still don't think it's a good take unless you maybe think of it like Dear Reader by Taylor Swift, and the idea of like burning all the files and like starting over, that kind of idea. Extreme, but taking on a new life could be similar to that. Like, you're like, to move on, sometimes you have to get rid of the past. That could be good, but I don't know how you would handle that unless she returns to her root life and says, fuck all this shit, I'm starting over. That could be a possible good ending.
I think that's maybe, I don't know, fight me if I'm wrong about this, that's probably the only good ending.
I think it's the only possible ending.
Yeah, I think it's hard to theorize outside of that, because my initial inclination on reading this book is like, oh, this book is gonna end with her still committing suicide. Like, that was what I kind of thought was.
Oh.
I that's where I felt like it was starting, is like, she's gonna go through all this stuff. There's gonna be so much disappointment. She's gonna continue to feel regret, and it's gonna be a book about just like accepting like depression, like accepting people who make this choice. And I was like, wow, like I thought, whoa, this is like going real dark real quick. Like, I don't know. I felt very skeptical about this having a positive ending. Part of me is like, this would be a very interesting book and I would like to see where that would go. The other part of me is like, I don't think any author would ever release that sort of book, because it could also be so bad, and like it could be received so poorly. It could be
so damaging.
Yeah, and it could be damaging, exactly. It's like the sort of book where it's like, it's the worthwhile philosophical conversation to have with your friends and academic folks, but it's maybe not like the best novel to release, Your
mention of living with the choice you made could hit, though.
Yeah.
That would be crazy. Like, you have to live with the choices you make, and that includes the choice to die. But that's so dark. That's
dark,
so
and the author would have to be very artful about getting that right.
Yeah, and I would not consider the parts we read artful.
Yeah. I would think that's not the goal at this point, though. I think ever since the polar bear situation started, I was like, nope, that's not where this is going. Like, she's finding a will to live. She
seems so sure of it. And of course you have like your ebbs and flows, and she's feeling very like alive right now. And of course that could change, but I think with the momentum of this book and what each life is kind of giving her, I think we're ending up in the I want to be alive bit.
Something I think that would be interesting, though, is if death is kind of like, all right, I'm coming for you, and Nora's like, no, and there's like a little like argument with death.
Oh my god, wait, I have a theory.
Yeah.
I have a theory. What if Hugo describes in his library, it's a video store and it's his uncle, and he describes that figure as like a guide and as basically God, or you could see it as God. What if Mrs. Elm is death?
Oh, this is like death's game.
Right. Or not like a game necessarily, but maybe like a last parting gift.
Interesting.
Or would it be a cruelty?
Well, if death's gonna take her anyway, it's probably a cruelty. I don't know. Maybe not if she like can carry some positivity with her from it to death. So maybe it's more neutral.
If you look at it from Hugo's point of view and he's taking this opportunity to slide, he's getting all of these highlights and he's experiencing so many things he never would have been able to experience. And then death comes for you. Is that a gift?
Oh, goodness. And that would be a great explanation for why someone who didn't end up here because they attempted suicide gets this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting.
Another hit of me being a genius? Possibly.
I love it. I love the idea of like death. Maybe it's because we just recently read a book where death is kind of highly present, but I would love the idea of like death being a character in a book like this.
I always love death as a character.
Yeah, like a literal character beyond just the like death is kind of a character no matter what in this book, but
right.
But like having the personification could be fun. Yeah,
because the idea of it being like a gentle figure you find comfort in, it just hits, you know? Mm-hmm. It's just nice.
There's definitely some other things we can talk about as far as like what we think is going to happen in the rest of the book or theories. So, I mean, I guess one was, do we think she's going to explore more lives, or do we think we're going to sit here for a while? I was noticing that she never experienced a life where she was still in the band or like doing the songwriting that she wanted to do.
Right, which I think the amount of times it's brought up, you have to go to it. You have to try it.
Yeah, I thought it would happen sooner. Like, she kind of gives a list of regrets pretty early on, and one of them is the band, and that's the only one from that list that she hasn't gone to yet.
Right.
Is there anything else in the futures and theories that we didn't talk about? You know, we talked about she might explore the band's life, or I think it'd be interesting, too, if the band life just was, like, her normal life. Like, she just, like, goes back and is like, I want to do it again. Even though I don't, like, entirely want her to, like, work with her brother. But
no, absolutely not.
I think it would be interesting to explore the Ash thing. We got only such a light taste of it.
Yeah, because, I mean, he wasn't just nice and passing. He, like, sat with her for a while, and they talked and things like that. And, I mean, small things, but I think for a book that's moving this quickly, it's an important detail to have.
He does seem to have, like, a thing, too. Like the way it was described to me, I was like, oh, like, he's interested in her, you know? Just a matter of if the other way applies.
Right.
Do we think that the way this book is going, that there's a chance that Nora will go into another life and run into Hugo, this version of Hugo again?
I don't know why there would be a reason for that to happen.
I just wonder if, like, this is intended to be a recurring character, or if this is just making a point about, you know, the things we talked about as far as the nothing matters approach.
Right. I think Hugo is serving a purpose in this moment to show that other people are like Nora, and also this is how you could possibly take on this experience. I think now that the science that has been possibly kind of explained is out of the way, he kind of doesn't serve a purpose anymore.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think there's a good chance she'll meet another slider.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know why else you would introduce the idea. I guess unless just all the point is contained within Hugo traveling around. But yeah, but I'd lean towards she's going to meet someone else, or she's going to try to meet other people, at least.
It'd be interesting if she met somebody who was a slider, but not by choice.
Mm-hmm. Someone who's, like, stuck.
So desperately they want to settle somewhere, but they can't. That might be interesting.
That would be interesting.
I would also like if we got more Izzy.
I think that'd be cool.
Well, she's alive in the root life. So I think if the book follows what I'm expecting of it, and she goes back to the root life, she could hook up with Ash, or, like, try, and then also maybe start to build up her relationship with Izzy again. Because they send each other, what, like, cards or something every year? Like, they have very basic interactions.
Right, they don't really talk much.
All it takes is one person reaching out in some kind of meaningful way. And I think she does before she ends herself. She's like, we should get back in contact. I haven't heard from you. It's been so crazy. Like, she does the I'm happy, everything's great, like, we should just talk and nothing's going on type of post to Izzy, I think is what happens. But to actually be honest and say, I I'm going through it and you were one of the best parts of my life and I would like to reconnect with you. I think that's all you need, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think she should put pressure. I don't think she should say, Izzy, I'm gonna kill myself if you don't talk to me.
Right.
But I think a genuine reaching out from Nora to Izzy would be nice.
It'd probably be well received, yeah.
Yeah.
Any other final parting thoughts?
Honestly, I think we've covered basically everything. As always, if you have your own thoughts and theories, absolutely hit us up on 5050_books on Twitter. And next episode, we'll just finish up. See you later.
Bye.